Hello, my name's Geraldine Miners from ADHD Parent Support West Glasgow, and a very warm welcome to our guide on helping your child with ADHD to get a good night's sleep. Now, we'd just like to emphasise at the start that those of us running the group are parents just like you. We're not health professionals and we're not here to give you professional advice. So if you're concerned about your child or you have unanswered questions, particularly anything in relation to medication, it's really important that you talk to your CAMS team or a health professional about that. But we've done our research and we've put together the best information that we can find on this subject. And we hope that in this next 20-25 minutes, we'll be able to give you some very helpful tips which will improve your situation at home. So why do we need a guide on ADHD and sleep? Well, one of the things that we hear in our group most often from parents is that they find sleep one of the most challenging aspects of having a child with ADHD. And it can mean that bedtimes and even night times turn into a real battleground. And if your child with ADHD doesn't go to sleep easily, then you're not alone. So this slide shows some research which was done by Ipsos Health back in 2005, and they interviewed parents of children with ADHD and parents whose children didn't have ADHD. And you can see the children without ADHD in the blue bars. So more than half of them generally drop off to sleep within 20 minutes of going to bed. And only a very tiny handful, 2%, are still awake after 90 minutes in bed. But for the children with ADHD who are shown in red, it's a very different story. Only 2%, that's 1 in 50, fall asleep within 20 minutes. And a staggering 15% are still awake 4 to 5 hours after being put to bed. And this slide from the same survey shows a very similar pattern. So parents here were asked, whilst you're trying to settle your child to sleep, how many times on average do they get up? And what you can see here is that children without ADHD, shown in blue, 2/3 of them, 66%, never get up once they're put to bed. But when it looks at parents of children with ADHD, only about 16% never get up, and a staggering 56%, so more than half, get up more than 4 times during the course of the evening after they've been put to bed. Now, if that sounds like your household, then you'll know just how frustrating and difficult that can be. So why do kids with ADHD find it so hard to get off to sleep? Well, there's been lots of research looking at this, and I think there are at least 4 reasons. So first of all, children with ADHD just find it very hard to calm down and to switch off their minds and switch off their bodies and to relax in a way that would enable them to get off to sleep. Secondly, children with ADHD are often hypersensitive. They can be hypersensitive to noise, to light, to other senses, tiny movements. And that means that instead of relaxing, they're on high alert. Even when they're in bed, they're listening to the car that's going down the road. They're listening to the argument that's going on with their big sister downstairs. Tiny lights coming through the window can keep them up. So there's hypersensitivity. I think a third factor is that there are often very big arguments and conflict at bedtime, and that can wind us up and also winds our kids up, so they're far from being relaxed when they come to lie down in bed. And a final reason is that the medication that's used to treat ADHD can actually make sleep worse. It's a recognised side effect of the stimulant medications, and some of that can be alleviated with adjusting the timing, but that's another factor. So the results of all this are that children struggle to get to sleep and stay asleep. And the fact that they don't get enough sleep means that their ADHD symptoms will actually be worse. And we as parents are tired, we're fed up, we're angry, and all of this is a cocktail of problems. So we need to try and address it. Now, we know that sleep is really important for all human beings, in fact, for all animals, but it's particularly important for children as it really contributes to their mental and physical development and growth. So, how much sleep does a child actually need? Well, this is quite a useful table, I think, from Sheffield Children's Hospital, which shows a suggested number of hours sleep needed in every 24 hours. Now, you might think this is a bit of a pipe dream, but actually, this is what we should be aiming for our children. So, children under the age of 3 need about 12 hours sleep a night, as well as naps during the day. But even when they're aged 10 to 13, they should ideally be getting about 10 hours a night, and teenagers need about 8.5 hours a night for good mental and physical health. So, how on earth can we help and support our children to get the sleep that they actually need and that we need them to have as well? Well, there are 4 factors for success in this, and I'm going to go through each one of them. But the first one is about the bedroom, the child's actual bedroom where they're going to go to bed. What's that like? Secondly, what's happening at the bedtime routine? What happens in that critical period before they actually go to bed? Thirdly, what's happening with the child's body and how can we make sure that that's kind of prepped and ready for sleep? And finally, how do we manage our children's behaviour once they're in bed? What do we do if they keep getting up and they don't actually want to go to sleep? So, the first of the 4 areas that we're going to look at, the 4 factors for success, is to do with the child's bedroom. What's that like? And this is something where you might actually want to have a session where you go round your child's room with your child and talk to them about what's helping them to sleep in the bedroom and what might be stopping them from getting to sleep. And there are a few different things to consider. So, the first is that experts tell us that people generally sleep best when it's really dark. So, many families find that it's quite helpful to use things like blackout blinds or well fitting curtains, but really to try and keep light to an absolute minimum. Now, of course, some children are afraid of the dark and they like to sleep with a night light on or a lava lamp or something like that. But I think the advice would be to try and get it dark if possible and only to use those things if it's absolutely necessary and keep them as dim as you can. The second thing to look at would be the air temperature in the room, because again, experts agree that people get to sleep and sleep more deeply if the air temperature is nice and cool. The mantra is kind of cool air, warm bed. So you want your child to have a nice warm duvet, obviously, and not to be cold in bed, but it can help if that air that they're breathing is fairly cool. And if you've got very strong central heating, then you might want to think about turning it down. A third thing to think about is to do with screens. And this is really the most important piece of advice, I think, in about the whole of this presentation. So everyone agrees that things like televisions, computers, phones and tablets in the bedroom when a child is trying to go to sleep, or even in that last hour before bed, is a really bad idea. And one of the reasons for that is that all of these devices give off a sort of blue light, and this light actually prevents the human body from making melatonin, which is the sleep hormone. So if a child is watching a screen, they definitely will not be able to drop off to sleep easily. The final thing that you might want to think about is the sound that your child is hearing or not hearing. Now, many children go to sleep best in a really silent and quiet environment, as much as you can achieve that. But some children with ADHD find that their thoughts are just kind of whizzing through their head when they're trying to drop off to sleep, and that actually it's more helpful if they can listen to something. We've certainly found in our house that listening to an audiobook, even a really boring audiobook that my son has heard a million times before, is much better for him than silence in terms of helping him to drop off to sleep. You might also want to think about things like earplugs. So that's just something to play around with and see what works best. So this slide is just emphasising what I just said, which is that the most critical thing is not to have screens in the bedroom, either in bed or even for a whole hour before bed. And there are so many reasons for this, not just the blue light, which I already mentioned, but also we saw research even just a couple of weeks ago showing that if older children have a phone in their bedroom, then even if nobody actually texts them or messages them, just the sheer anticipation that that phone might be about to ring or that somebody might be able to send them a text or an update is enough to keep them on alert and keep them up all night. So we just can't say this enough, really. No screens in bed, no screens an hour before bed. And this one really is just about some places that you might go to find some nice relaxing sounds to help your child sleep, if indeed that's what's helpful for them. So, for example, there are quite a few apps around that you can download on a phone or an iPad. This is one called Nature Sounds Relax and Sleep. That you can download for free, and it's got all sorts of sounds like waves and wind and white noise that's really very calming. There are also some good YouTube channels which have tranquil sleep music. Um, some kids listen to a quiet, gentle CD on a CD player. Now, obviously, if you're going to use your phone or a tablet or something like that to generate sounds that will help a child to sleep, then you're going to have to be really careful to make sure that the screen is turned right off and that the Wi-Fi and the signal is also turned right off. For my son, we managed to find a really ancient iPod in a pound shop that cost next to nothing, had no SIM card in it, no nothing, and he uses that to listen to these kind of sounds on an app, and that's been very helpful for us. So here's the second factor for success, and this is all about the bedtime routine. So, what happens in those couple of hours before your child goes off to bed? And there are a few things here. So, one is that experts tell us that it's a really good idea for children to have a regular bedtime and a regular waking up time, even in the school holidays and even at weekends, just to try and keep it as samey as possible. Because if we allow our children to go to bed much later at weekends or in the school holidays, then it can be very, very difficult to pull it back again. It's also important, they tell us, to try and wake our children up at a fixed time each morning. So, as tempting as it can be to just let them sleep in, if they will sleep in, if they've been to sleep really late at night, it's not a good idea because once their whole body clock's got out of kilter, then it's very, very difficult to get it back again. A second factor for success is a very predictable routine every night, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. It's also important to help our children to relax and to calm down before bed. And Sleep Scotland actually recommend that a bath is a good idea if you have a bath rather than a shower. And that's not just because a bath itself is a relaxing thing to do, it's also because a bath, when you get into a hot bath, it raises your child's body temperature quite high. And when they get back out of the bath, the body temperature just falls very quickly and it can actually make them feel sleepy, much sleepier than a shower would. And finally, reading or listening to stories to wind down before bed is really, really helpful. So just having half an hour of reading, listening to you, telling them a story, perhaps listening to an audio book, just helps them to relax and to calm down. So here's just an example of a good bedtime routine. And obviously, you need to adjust this and think about what's going to work best for your own child. It may actually be that putting them in bed as early as 8 o'clock just isn't going to work because they're not going to go to sleep at that time. So rather than putting them in bed too early, it's obviously important to come up with something that's actually realistic. But making this as predictable and clear as possible and not negotiating about it can be a good thing. So it's quite a good idea to write out your bedtime routine and have it stuck up on the wall somewhere in the house so that you know and your child knows exactly what's going to happen when. So this is just a little example. So, here are the third set of things which are factors for success in getting our children off to sleep. And these are all things to do with our children's body and making sure that their body is as ready as it can be to actually lie down and go to sleep. So, the first thing is to make sure that our children don't go to bed hungry or thirsty. Now, we know that children with ADHD who are on medication often find that their appetite is quite reduced during the day. So, during the evening, they can end up being ravenously hungry. And it's a very good idea to just give them a healthy snack in the last hour or so before bed. And perhaps send them up with a drink of water so that they just can't use hunger or thirst as a reason for why they can't go off to sleep. A second thing is that all the experts would say that having plenty of physical exercise during the day really helps with sleep, but not physical exercise just right in that last hour before bed when they need to be calming down. So if your child you think can't get to sleep and just isn't ready for sleep, one of the things you might want to think about is there any way during the rest of the day that they could actually be burning off a bit more energy, walking a bit further, getting off the bus a stop ahead of time, having a run around, kicking a ball, whatever it is, just to burn off that extra energy. A third thing that all the experts agree on is that sugar and especially caffeine, so any of those drinks like Coke, even tea, which contain caffeine, are a bad idea and they can all interfere with sleep. So it's best to avoid them throughout the day, really, but especially in that period before bed. The last couple of things relate to medication. So, the first is that ADHD medication, stimulant medication, can interfere with sleep. And sometimes you can sort that out by adjusting the timing of the ADHD medication. So, perhaps giving it a bit earlier in the morning so that it's worn off completely before the child is calming down and going to sleep. But that's something to talk to your CAMS team about when you have an ADHD review to see whether there's anything that can be done with medication that might help. And the second thing is to do with melatonin. So, we've put in a slide on melatonin because it's something that very often comes up within our Facebook group as something that people are very interested in. So, what is melatonin? Well, melatonin is not a drug. It's a naturally occurring hormone that's produced by the pineal gland in the brain. So, we all produce it naturally, and it's involved in coordinating the body's sleep wake cycle and helping to regulate sleep. So, there's been a lot of interest in looking at whether melatonin can help children with ADHD to help them to get off to sleep more quickly, because it is such a common problem in ADHD. And melatonin is sometimes prescribed for children with ADHD to help them with this. So, if you're interested in that, it's something you should talk to your CAMS team about to get more information. But you can also have a look online. There was a NICE review, so NICE stands for the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, looking at the evidence about ADHD and melatonin. And the link to it is on the bottom of this slide. Or if you just Google the words NICE, melatonin, ADHD all together, it will take you to the NICE guidance, and there's information there for parents and patients specifically, which will summarise the evidence for you about melatonin. So, here are the final set of factors for success, and this is all about your child's behaviour once they're actually in bed. And I think a lot of us, even though we've done everything right in terms of preparing our child's bedroom, sorting out their bedtime routine, trying to make sure that their body is kind of prepped for bed, they can still exhibit some really challenging behaviour once we actually try and get them into bed. And it's not just a case of saying goodnight and walking out of the door, they're coming out, coming down over and over again, and we can end up getting into a huge row with them, which leaves us and them completely unable to relax and calm down at all. So, how can we help our children with their behaviour once they're in bed? Well, one thing that experts really agree on is that it's a good idea, if you possibly can, to try and teach your child to fall asleep on their own. If you stay in the room with them, even though some children find that quite comforting, it actually sets up the conditions for a lot of chat and a lot of row once they're ready to go to sleep. So we can reinforce good behaviour around bedtime with all the normal kind of discipline things that we use for children with ADHD in general. So that's about offering rewards. You can't reward a child for having a good night's sleep because it's not totally within their control how much sleep they have, but we absolutely can reward them for good behaviour about going through their bedtime routine, getting into bed without a big fuss, and staying in their bed once we've said goodnight to them. So you can do that through encouragement, through praise, but even through reward charts and tokens, and potentially a bit of an incentive at the end of the week if they can string together a few nights where they behave really well around bedtime. The other thing that is really important is to be absolutely consistent and determined about the rules, about the bedtime routine, and about the rules that we set for what happens after we've said goodnight. And the total key to all of this is to be really calm and really boring. So, this is all I've got to say about calm and boring. It's really tiny because the most important thing after you've said goodnight to your child is do not let them wind you up. Say as little as you can and just be doggedly determined about this is the rules, this is the way it's going to be, and it doesn't matter what you chuck at me, this is how it's going to happen. It's very difficult at first because when they come back out of their room or they start winding you up, you think, oh my goodness, here we go again. And your blood pressure starts to rise and you start thinking, right, we're in for a big row. But I would urge you to just keep it small, keep it quiet. And if you're doggedly determined and they see that there's not going to be any difference in how you behave because of how they behave, then they will get the message. So, just finally, here's a couple of things that you can do to help plan all of this and to put it into action. And one thing you can do with your child, which is actually quite fun, is to complete a sleep diary. And it can be very, very helpful. And this is a particularly good one that we found online. I've put the web link there. It's sleepforkids.org and then /PDF/sleep diary. You can download it and print it off. If you come along to our meetings and you don't have a printer, then you can just ask me and I'll print one off for you. But it's something you can work through with your child over a week to help them to think about what helps them to get off to sleep and to involve them in the problem and helping to find a solution, because your child may well have good suggestions for what would actually help them to get a better night's sleep. So, thank you for watching through to the end of this guide. I hope you found it helpful. There are a few ideas here for places that you could go to for further help. One thing you can do is to talk to your CAMS team at your next ADHD review appointment about the sleep difficulties that your child is having. It's something that they should be asking about anyway because it's such a well recognised problem with ADHD, but don't be afraid to be honest with them about the difficulties that you're up against. Secondly, you could consider visiting the Sleep Scotland website. Sleep Scotland are a charity based in Scotland whose remit is to help children with disabilities and additional support needs with sleep problems, and they're very expert. If you go to their website, which is sleepscotland.org, you can email them and request a call back from a sleep counsellor. And what they'll do is phone you and talk through the difficulties that you're having and coach you and give you some advice. In some cases, they can also do a home visit, although they may have to be referred and you may need to live in a particular area. They'll also probably recommend that you complete a sleep diary, a bit like the one that I've put on the previous page. They'll email you one of theirs. Finally, if you're not a member of our group and you live within Greater Glasgow or the area roundabout, then please do join our group via our website, which is adhdglasgow.org. We'd love to see you along at one of our meetings or to welcome you into our Facebook group where you can talk confidentially online to other parents who are going through many of the same challenges that you are, and that will be really helpful, we hope too. So thanks for watching and all the best of luck.